The first one that we can talk through is really, one of the challenges in the construction industry that we see is, there's several groups involved in the payment stream. And one of the things that we have seen with our clients and subcontractors in general across the country is that it's taking longer for general contractors to make their payments or process their payments. And that's really not a reflection of the general contractors playing with money or sitting on anything or not having the ability to pay. Really, I don't think anyone within the payment stream is doing anything wrong. It's just a reality of the complexity of processing draws and getting funding within a construction project. So, with the pay when paid clauses through many states and pay when paid clause that we find in most commercial construction contracts, the subcontractors end up, getting extended out because they're buying material, they are paying for labor, basically performing their work, submitting their payment application, and then it goes up to the general contractor who consolidates, goes on to the owner. The owner has to review, has to validate. Then payment does get processed ultimately or gets approved for processing. Then it gets collected, and then the general contractor has to do the same thing. So you could see where, payment streams can become elongated, and that's one of the most common, challenges that we see within this industry.
Yep. So, from a subcontractor perspective, we obviously our vendors ask us to pay based on terms, not basically on paid when paid. Everyone knows the lien rights and the paid when paid policies and so forth. But, at the end of the day, we want good vendors. And sometimes we like to focus on, smaller local vendors that can't wait 30, 60 days. And as Greg said, it's not that the GCs are doing anything wrong. It's just the process of paid when paid. So, there definitely is a place in the market for, trying to get our pay apps paid quicker than, the current time that it's taking. Another point, and may or may not be applicable to the webinar, but it's talking about retention. So most general contractors are putting 10% on retention. The owners are putting 10% on them. One thing that we do as a low-hanging fruit is make sure that when you get your contracts, you always ask for a reduction in retention. So, whether that's, cut it in half in the beginning and only do 5% instead of 10%. I think you'll be surprised how many say yes. And then if you're a, early in subcontractor, just make sure again that when you're done with your scope or 50% of your scope, you get that reduction in there. Because again, you want good vendors that like you and want to service you. And we need to make sure that, they're getting paid. And in order for them to get paid, we have to get paid.
There's a couple different differences we see with, those different, contractor types. So Greg, if you want to expand a little bit on how you've seen, the difference for, what we're seeing here between the GCs and subs and how that kind of plays into what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think what we wanted to show and discuss here is just kind of the reality of the cash flow cycles amongst the different groups within a construction project. I think this is a good kind of visual or illustrative example of what the cash flows look like. I mean, an owner, developer, depending on the situation, maybe coming in with equity in the beginning, and then is going to build out their project with financing, funding coming from their construction loan. So kind of going left to right and then top to bottom on this particular slide, you can see where the owner developer, they're front loading their cash into the project, probably not, whatever the requirement is. And then from there, they're pretty cash neutral throughout the end. And then hopefully it's a successful project and they're going to get, their gain toward the end of the project, whether it's through cash flows or through liquidating or selling the asset, disposing of it. The general contractor, playing a vital role is there to basically handle all the subs and perform the project for the benefit of the owner, and may not have as much of a cash flow strain. I mean, it's not to say that they don't have overhead and they don't have expenses and investment within the project, but not to the extent that you see on the bottom, which is the subcontractor, who what we have found in talking with so many, of our clients and in different groups across the country is that they really either literally are or feel like they are financing the project or funding the project often, maybe not themselves, but a collection of the whole are doing that. And you can see really how the cash cycle works from a subcontractor's perspective compared to the same periods for the owner and the general contractor. And that is, like I mentioned earlier, they're paying their labor, they're paying for their materials, their supplies on the front end, and all of that work is getting done in preparation for the submission of the payout. And then ultimately they have to wait for the payment to get processed. Meanwhile, they're still performing on additional work and getting to their percentage completion. And what we have seen in our experience is that, and in discussions and kind of proving it up, is that they're really cash negative on a project, really depending on the length of the project, but let's say between 40 and 60% of the project. They don't really start seeing kind of getting to a break even from a cash perspective until 60 to 70 to 80% completion, and then ultimately getting profit, once they're collecting on their retainage and there's a successful completion of their portion of the work. So this, I think, is a good illustration of the different groups that are involved and the strain that a subcontractor feels in pretty much every project. We get a lot of calls for funding and for relief. And so that's, the purpose of Quick Pay Direct to help solve for them.